Anthony Albanese has flagged strengthening Australia's defence cooperation with Indonesia and other Southeast Asian nations. The rising influence of China, trade and climate change, all high on the agenda during these leaders' talks at the Presidential Palace. Joining me live is the Assistant Minister for Defence and Veterans Affairs, Matt Thistlethwaite. Thanks so much for your time, Matt. These meetings are always really important. What we always have is a sanitised view of things, of what happened in the meeting. But what does this actually mean, do you think, closer defence ties between our two nations?
Good morning, Laura. Thanks for having me on. The relationship with Indonesia is a very important one for Australia, and Labor in government is keen to strengthen that relationship. As you mentioned earlier, we're facing an increasingly assertive China within our region, a changing geostrategic position within the Asia-Pacific. So it makes sense for Australia to seek to strengthen cooperation with Indonesia, not only around defence, but also around trade and climate change as well. And it's pleasing to see that one of the first trips of the Prime Minister is to our nearest neighbour to the north, to strengthen that relationship and to indicate that we're keen to cooperate when it comes to defence, to increasing trade ties and to fighting climate change.
But what would that look like? Would we do, joint exercises? Would there be more cooperation and sharing of defence assets?
It could involve all of those things. Australia has a great reputation when it comes to training other military units in our region. We certainly have the space for joint operations, and we have a number of nations that use Australian fields and Australian waters for joint operations and training exercises. So it certainly could involve those things. The discussions will begin now in earnest between the defence ministers and the leaders of our nation to put in place the objectives of strengthening this cooperation.
And of course, Anthony Albanese will be attending the G20 summit later this year. Interesting to see how he's dealt with the question of Vladimir Putin attending that meeting. Is it Labor's view that it's better to have Vladimir Putin there and address some of these grave issues rather than exclude him and isolate him even further?
Well, we think that it's important that we do participate in the G20. It's an important international economic forum, particularly given the headwinds that the international economy is facing at the moment, with the energy crisis that's developed out of the Ukraine war, with rising interest rates and inflation throughout the world, with the OECD agenda around corporate tax and increasing transparency and accountability. There's a number of important issues. However, we have made the case that there are issues with Vladimir Putin's attendance, and that's a decision for the Indonesian government to make. But we want to make sure that Australia is there, part of that G20 meeting, because it is very important for the international community moving forward.
Is this a shirt-fronting moment for Anthony Albanese later in the year, do you think?
I think it's Anthony Albanese standing up for Australian values. We've strongly condemned the war in Ukraine. The Australian government has been involved in supplying hardware to the Ukrainian people, who've done an excellent job defending their nation and their territory. We've been involved in the economic sanctions, which are all working. I don't think that Vladimir Putin could have foreseen just how tough and resilient the Ukrainian people have been in defending their nation, and the war certainly hasn't gone to plan for him. And the best thing for him to do would be to withdraw his troops from Ukraine and allow Ukrainian people to get back to democracy and to re-establish a government and live in peace amongst secure borders. And that's what Vladimir Putin should be doing. Whether he does or not is another question.
We've seen world leaders visit Kyiv and visit Volodymyr Zelensky. Is that something Anthony Albanese is planning to do, or in your view should do?
We'll certainly seek to strengthen ties between Ukraine and Australia. And contact between Anthony Albanese and the Ukrainian president will be very important. It's worth noting that the Ukrainian president did address the parliament in the final days of the last parliament. He received 2 standing ovations, which is something that I've never seen in my time in the parliament. But Anthony's got a number of important international engagements, and I'm sure that Vladimir Zelensky will be top of the priority list for international leaders for Anthony to reach out to and ensure that they understand that although there's been a change of government in Australia, that our posture hasn't changed and that we're backing the Ukrainian people.
Just finally, I know you'll have an eye to what the RBA does this afternoon. This is a big test for a new government with these economic headwinds ahead. We see rising interest rates, we see this high inflation environment. How adaptive is Jim Chalmers? How flexible is he going to be with this changing economy?
I think Jim will do an excellent job. There's probably no person that's been better prepared to take on the role of Treasurer of our nation, particularly during this difficult economic situation at the moment. Jim, of course, has a long history of working with Treasury. He spent many years in opposition working in the Treasury portfolio. As he's indicated, decisions regarding interest rates are made independently by the Reserve Bank, but they have indicated that they foresee interest rate rises to try and tap the brakes on inflation, which is starting to get to very high levels in Australia. So we'll await the decision of the Reserve Bank today. But I think that Jim's already indicated there will be a review of the Reserve Bank and its mandate from government over the course of this term. And that's about updating that mandate to ensure that it meets the needs of the Australian people and the economy moving forward. So I think Jim will do an excellent job and is certainly adaptable to those changing economic circumstances.
Yeah, and they are changing quite rapidly as well. Matt Thistlethwaite, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Laura.